Hey guys, what's up? I'm Erin and welcome back to the channel. One of the pinnacle topics of this channel is retirement. How to prepare for it, what to do when you get there, and pretty much everything in between. With the help of my friend James Conole, we dive into the topic of what it looks like to retire comfortably, not just from a financial standpoint, but also from an emotional standpoint, making sure that you get to accomplish all of your life goals, because at the end of the day, that's what your money is there for, to build the life that makes you feel happy, successful, and comfortable. So with that, let's dive in. Hey guys, today I am joined by James Conole of Root Financial Planning. He has an amazing YouTube channel. I'm going to put all the links for it down below. So today we kind of want to talk about what it might take to retire comfortably. Thanks for joining us, James.
Thanks for having me, Erin. We chatted on my channel a couple weeks ago, and I'm excited to be on yours and continuing the conversation.
Yeah, thanks for being here. So you work in depth with clients on retirement and what an ideal retirement looks like, which I'm sure looks different for everybody. How do you approach it?
So that word ideal that you just said is where I would start. I think there's this sense, I don't know if you remember, this was probably 20 years ago when I was a kid. I remember seeing some commercial. And it was like this guy walking his dog, and what's my number? And I think it was probably some big insurance company. And there's like
$1
million, $500,000.
And all those different heads had like a different number above them, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. So everyone's walking their dogs or walking down the street. And it was almost like this sense of there's a formula to get to your number, which in some ways might be true. But I think that word you mentioned of ideal is obviously very different for every person. And the way we think about planning is almost like a good financial plan is where you have your vision board on the one hand. What do you actually want your life to look like? If you can create the perfect retirement, the perfect life, start with that. And then the numbers on the other hand of how do we enable that vision? So start by not even thinking about the numbers, but what do you actually want to do? Mm-hmm. What does the perfect day, week, month, year look like? Where are you traveling? What are the activities you're doing? Who are you spending time with? Some of these things cost money, some of these things don't, but I think it's just that what you want life to look like, conversation, or just even ideation of what is it we're trying to create. And then from there, I like to at least start with the basic 3-step process that doesn't cover every last thing, but it's just this 3-step process to give you a basic idea of what do you need to enable that? What actually is your number, to kind of go back to that commercial, that would unlock your ability to live this ideal life that you just referenced.
I feel like some of us in the financial community, myself, I am totally guilty of it. Sometimes we get more focused on the number itself rather than the things we want to do, where we want to travel, how we want to spend it, what activities we want to do, when do we want to see family. I think that's what the money's for, but sometimes we get so caught up in chasing a single number that we kind of forget what the number does.
Yes. And here's the risk with that is, say your number's $1 million, just to use a round number. What you're going to begin to subconsciously start believing is that once you hit that $1 million in your portfolio, you've arrived. And all of a sudden, that confidence that you're looking for, that peace of mind that you're looking for, that just total sense of I'm here, it's a bit delusional because you get there and you say, oh, I don't feel any different.
Yep.
Maybe I chose the wrong number. Maybe it's not $1 million. Maybe it's $2 million. And so you keep working, you keep grinding, you keep saving, and you hit $2 million. And again, you're a little let down because that feeling that I thought I would have, nothing actually feels different. Just the numbers have changed. And in fact, some ways, the feeling you get less confident, you get more anxious because the responsibility of all that, or the downside of one mistake, it starts feeling like a bigger burden to manage. And so if anything, it's very easy to get caught in this trap of, we'll call it goalpost planning, of you're constantly moving the goalposts, thinking that that's the magical thing. Whereas if you view your portfolio as the thing that you're pursuing, you're missing the point.
Yeah.
The portfolio or your income or your assets, those are the things that can enable you to actually accomplish what you're actually pursuing, which is, Erin, to your point, those relationships, those trips, those experiences, the things that actually matter. And that's not to say the numbers don't matter, because without the numbers, without the portfolio, those things can't happen. But we have to understand the proper context of what should we be prioritizing versus what becomes a distraction at best and even a vain pursuit at worst of you're completely missing the point of what you're trying to do.
And sometimes even the way you described it, it just always reminds me, the journey to building it up is so much easier because I feel like you're going after that goal. You're like, okay, I'm hitting this number, whether it's 1 million, 2 million, whatever. But once you hit it, then all these other questions that you didn't anticipate come up. Like, how am I going to spend this down? How do I actually start to withdraw? Like, what does that look like? I know we touched on that in the video that we did together where we talked about like what spending looks like in retirement. But you mentioned at the start that there's kind of a 3-part framework when it talks about building up this portfolio. How do you approach it with that 3-part framework?
Yeah, I think that you start with the sense of the portfolio doesn't exist, as we mentioned, just to be this number. This portfolio exists in most cases to create some level of income that will grant you financial independence. I mean, you can create the income you need from that portfolio to replace your paycheck to do what you want to do. And so the 3 steps I like to go through is, number 1, start with what are your expenses actually going to be. So if I'm preparing for retirement, and it really doesn't matter what age, in my 40s, in my 50s, in my 60s, start with that ideal life. What do I actually want to do? Dream a little bit, and then work backwards into saying, what's that going to cost? Like I said, some of these things that you want to do cost money. If you want to take these trips to Europe, if you want to take these cruises, if you want to join whatever country club, those are things that might cost quite a bit of money.
Yeah.
On the other hand, if you're like, I just want to be outside, I just want to go hiking, I just want to spend time with my grandchildren, I just want to spend time volunteering down the local shelter, those aren't things that actually cost any money. So it's this sense of what actually matters to you and then working backwards to quantify what would it actually take for me to be able to do each of these things that I want to do. So let's just use a basic round number. Assume that you go through that and you say, I need $10,000 per month. I'm just using that because that's simple math. That's step 1, is define the amount you need coming in order to support that vision that you have for your retirement. Step number 2, it isn't to say, okay, how much portfolio do I need to have to create $10,000 per month? It's to say, well, what non-portfolio income sources will I have coming in that will help me?
I feel like those get forgotten a lot.
They do.
Yeah.
They do. And you know, a lot of people will say, and they'll say this verbatim, I view Social Security as the cherry on top. Or I view, and say, that's great, but keep in mind, Social Security, it's not designed to be the entirety of your paycheck, but it can be quite significant.
Oh, yeah, especially for high income earners. I mean, you can get a Social Security check that can be $3,000, $4,000, even $5,000 if you have the max payout.
Exactly. And if it's a married couple in retirement, you can double that potentially if both are. So you can have a very healthy amount of income. And even if it's not an incredibly high amount, whatever it is coming in from Social Security, that's significantly lessening the pressure on your other assets, your portfolio, to have to create all the income.
You stole the words right out of my mouth. I was going to say, it takes the pressure off investments. Exactly.
Which there's a handful. There's several benefits to that, but I think that that's the thing that people need to start with is, okay, 10,000 is the number in our hypothetical example here. Let's assume I have a couple $1,000s coming in from Social Security. Maybe a spouse has a couple $1,000s coming in from Social Security. And let's also assume that I have a pension of $2,000 per month. Now, obviously, not everyone has a pension, but I'm just using this as an example of what income sources do you have. It doesn't matter how you're invested. It doesn't even matter how much you have in your investment account. Those are some income floors. Those are some stable sources of income that will be with you for the rest of your life. Well, in this case, I would add those 3 things up. 2,000 for me, 2,000 for a spouse, 2,000 pen, 6,000 is coming in.
Yeah.
That's a lot of money. And what that means is that $10,000 that I need to create, going back again to maintain that lifestyle, that ideal lifestyle, 60% of that is already taken care of. Now, I know there's taxes and other stuff there, so there's some nuance to this, but 6,000. So what step 3 now is step 3 is saying, okay, well, what's the difference between how much I want to spend and how much I have coming in non-portfolio income sources? In this example, it's 4,000 per month, 48,000 per year. I'm just going to round that to 50. I need $50,000 per year to be able to supplement my pension and our Social Security benefits to get to the 10,000, which then allows me to do all those things that I actually want to do. And that 50,000 per year, that's the final thing that you can look at to say, okay, what withdrawal rate is needed, or what does that represent of the bigger pie of your portfolio? And this is where you back into your number. And there's all different kinds of ways of looking at this. Of some people say you can spend 4% of your portfolio per year and have that last for 30 years. Others will say higher, mid 5s and above. Depends on a lot of things. But let's just use a nice simple number. Let's say 5%. No way I guarantee. This is not this is just saying use this as an example. If $50,000 needs to represent 5% of the bigger portfolio, I can take 50,000, divide it by 5%, and that gives me $1 million. Not, it doesn't give me $1 million, but it tells me you would need $1 million to be able to make this happen. And so there's nuances, and we can discuss those. And I think what might be helpful to discuss, Erin, is this isn't the only way of doing this. There's other ways of creating this income, and we can discuss other options. But you very simply said, how do you attach your actual portfolio to something that it's actually designed to accomplish? You started with your ideal, your vision, here's what success looks like. And as you've worked through that, you've come up with what is my goal? Not to just become an ever-increasing goalpost, I keep pushing back. But once I get there, I know that I can now support and fund these things that I want to do.
And I think you make a really great point here that we need to highlight. With $1 million portfolio, based on the scenario you gave, if there's Social Security and if a pension, you're getting an income of $120,000. I think so many people default to only considering investments, and they're like, oh, if you retire on just $1 million and you follow, say, the 4% rule instead of a 5% rate of withdrawal, they're automatically like, oh, you're only living on $40,000 a year. You're just going to be scraping by in the vast majority parts of the country. So I just think you need to consider all income sources, because just look at the example you gave. We're at a 6-figure income, which could be a great income, especially if you're living in a paid off home, 2 income sources, paid off cars, kids are out of the house, they're grown, they're self-sufficient. That could be a great standard of living. You're not scrimping by with $1 million portfolio, which a lot of people to these days just say $1 million just doesn't go that far.
Yeah. And you could be right or you could be wrong, depending upon the context and what you're talking about. And this is why starting with that ideal, what does your retirement look like? Not what does the commercial talk about, not what is your neighbor doing, not what is your brother-in-law saying, but what do you actually want to do? And I find, Erin, that's actually the hardest part for most people. It's easy to pay attention to the numbers. It's easy to say, here's how much I'm putting in my 401k. It's easy to, sometimes we lose ourselves in the numbers and we forget to actually think about, what do I want to do? What does my retirement need to look like for me to look back one day and say, I really got the most out of life because I pursued the things I wanted to do?
Because this is what you do every single day. You see people entering into retirement, saving for their retirement, then spending down in retirement. How many people do you think prepare for an accurate retirement? Because my belief is that the vast majority of people kind of look at what their spending is today, and there's a lot of life changes once you go into retirement.
Yeah. It's very difficult. Most people do not.
Yeah.
Most people do not. And for a few reasons. One is, to your point, if you're preparing for life today, do you have a mortgage today? And maybe that mortgage is paid off when you're retired. And that doesn't mean you need to take a pay cut. You're just going to naturally spend less because you're no longer paying the bank to repay your mortgage. Do you have maybe children you're supporting today with tuition costs, with life costs, whatever? Maybe that goes away at a certain point. I think some people, they look at their gross income today and they say, man, I'm earning $200,000 today. I'm earning $300,000 today, whatever it is. That's a lot of money to replace. Mm-hmm. Well, keep in mind, a good portion of that you're probably saving to a 401k or you're saving for retirement. You no longer need to save for retirement when you're in retirement, so you can take that out.
I want to pause you there, actually, just because I have so many people in my audience, and I know these are going to be the same people in your audience. How many people continue to save once they hit retirement?
Well, I think they need to. There's almost this, I encourage them not to.
Yes.
Not just for sinking funds like vacations, if you're pulling money out on a monthly basis and preparing for that trip you're going to take, but there's this mindset that's hard.
I've done this for 40 years. How do I stop?
Correct. And that's a difficult thing. And I think when you can start to show that you're just moving money from one bucket to you're pulling from one to pay the other, your net worth isn't actually changing. Your progress isn't actually changing. It's just limiting what you can actually spend if you think through, I got to keep saving a certain portion of this. I like to think of that from the standpoint of you shouldn't, or you don't need to keep saving if you don't want to. Even taxes, like taxes on Social Security, much more tax efficient, a dollar that you earn there compared to a dollar in wages. Is money coming from a brokerage account, a Roth IRA, tax advantages to some of that.
All of those are way more efficient than earned income. The earned income is the least tax efficient income source we can have.
Exactly. Payroll taxes, 7.65%. So
Yeah.
a lot of these things go away to where even if you're earning a very healthy income today, you don't need to maintain that same level of income in retirement to maintain the same lifestyle you have when you start backing out taxes. Not all taxes, of course, but a chunk of them. When you start backing out mortgage payments, when you start backing out family support potentially, when you start backing out other things that are expenses along the way that aren't going to be there when you're retired.
Yeah. So where do you think most people fall when it comes to their comfortable retirement? I know that's not a word we can apply to everyone broadly, but when we compare it to their pre-retirement income levels and once they eventually step away from the workforce, what kind of range do you think people should target? And I know it's a range. It's not going to be one number for
Yeah,
everyone.
it's a range. It's generally going to be it's going to be I know there's statistics that say maybe it's 60 to 70% of what you're currently spending, but I think that what we try to encourage clients to do is that vision board concept. It can sound woo-woo, it can sound it's
Yeah.
almost like you have a chance to dream again.
Yeah.
You get the rest of your life to make retirement the absolute best season of your life. You no longer have to be working the 40, 50 hours. Now, if you love work, keep doing it. But
Yeah.
most people, by the time they get to this point, many people are ready to do something different. So start with that. Like don't limit what could be based upon what life already has been. Think through, this has nothing to do with finances. Think through, what do you actually want to do? And that could change things wildly. Do you want to support scholarships or give to charities that you care about? Do you just want to spend time with your kids and grandkids? Do you want to get really good at pickleball? Do you want to prioritize your health because you haven't done so in the last 30 plus years? Do you want to move to a different part of the country because you're no longer tied down, because your work is no longer a big part of your life? So there's all these things that I think are actually, like I said, more challenging for a lot of people than the financial side. That's where the range could be the standard 60 to 70% of pre-retirement income if you're just going to maintain what you're doing, or it could be dramatically different if you're going to take a completely different path in retirement than
I,
before.
I think that what you just touched on is kind of the heart of financial planning, but we don't get to talk about it really. We don't get to talk about the money is really only there to build the life you want. It's meant to be used to build the life you want, but our content, our conversations with people, it always has to focus on the number because that's the question people have. But really, the more important question is, what do you want to do with it?
Yeah. I'm going to give an example of this isn't necessarily exactly like what we're talking about, but tax planning is a big piece of what we'll do, of how do you save money on taxes throughout your retirement. And that can be a wonderful thing, but it can also be a trap. And it's a trap because let's assume, Aaron, we're going to do some Roth conversions for you when you retire. And in order for those to be most effective, we're trying to keep your taxable income as low as possible for the first several years of retirement. So we can shift money from your traditional IRAs to your Roth IRAs while still staying under key tax thresholds that we don't want to exceed. Client, you can take that to the extreme of, oh, okay, well, I'm not going to take that trip with my family this year because I want to keep my taxable income low. And I'm not going to spend as much as I could have because I'm trying to keep income super low. And on paper, it's, wow, you're saving hundreds of thousands of dollars in taxes over the course of your retirement. And it seems like success when you're looking at a Monte Carlo number or when you're looking
Yeah.
at here's what your portfolio is going to do. And that's where you have to define, what is success? Is success that? I don't think so.
Like, make
I
sure
would
you're
hate
using
for
the
you.
right yardstick.
Use the right yardstick. Otherwise, you're going to get to the end of your life with lots of money and lots of tax savings, but none of the experiences or none of the things along the way that actually made it worth living. So how do you find that right balance of start with what you want life to look like, and then the financial side should do nothing but complement that and support that, not in any way take away from it or detract from it.
I love that. It inspires me to maybe say, maybe there's a goal planning session that's not money related that goes into, say, each year. Or maybe you just say, these are my non-negotiables for this year of a trip I want to take or a gift that I want to give to somebody. And then just make sure to work those into your financial plan rather than just focusing on the dollars and cents.
Yeah, exactly. And the last thing I'll say on this is there tends to be an inverse correlation of the people that have saved and invested and prepared the most tend to have the most difficult time doing this sometimes.
Yes.
And what I'll always say is you are where you are because you are who you are. And that's not just going to magically change. So the
I
person's
also,
been,
oh God.
no, please.
I was going to add that I feel like people who have experienced very severe economic situations. Like in my generation, we started in the workforce in 2008. That was a big economic downturn. And so many people don't trust the stock market because of that. I feel like if you go through these situations where you experience a huge monetary loss or you experience a huge job loss, you're more conservative for the rest of your life, including retirement.
I think that's a great example. If do you know anyone from the Great Depression era?
Yeah.
My grandma is that. The extreme levels of frugality. And some of this, by the way, is necessary. This level of frugality is necessary when there's a scarcity, when there's
Yeah,
and
at
you
the
must,
time.
at the time, you have to ask yourself, is this mindset, is this way of living still serving me? Or have I moved past that point of it's no longer a necessity and it's actually holding me back? But you're right, we are all shaped by our experiences, our upbringing, typically the bad experiences more so than the good experiences, and
They
that
leave more of
shapes
an impression.
it leaves more of an impression. And in many cases, that led to healthy behavior when that behavior was necessary. And we have to constantly reassess and say, is that behavior still helping me? Or could I start to think differently about this? So that I always look at things from the standpoint of how do we avoid, to the greatest extent possible, regrets at the end of our life. And so many of those regrets would be driven by the scarcity mindset of saying no to things because of the financial cost or because of the perceived risk. When if we could take a step back, we might realize that's not at all risky. In fact, the biggest risk is not doing some of these things. So I know we started off with a very technical financial conversation, but everything always goes back to what does a life well lived look like?
Absolutely. And I think accomplishing it from an emotional standpoint is the harder part of it. The money's easy from the sense of it has a concrete answer, there's a number, but the emotional component is something that's a little harder to target and harder to sometimes allow happen.
Yeah, fully agreed.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being here. I've loved this and it was a pleasure.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Aaron. And I think this is the intersection of money and I don't want to say emotion, but money and life. And at that intersection is where the good, real financial planning happens.
100% agree. And I think it gets a little too overlooked. So I'm glad we were able to talk about it today.
Likewise. Thanks, Aaron.
So I'm going to put a link for everything for James down below. If you guys like this one, give it a like, share it with a friend, and thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next one.